Before there was a computer-generated Hulk, there was one real man. Green paint alone was enough to transform into the character, because the physique underneath it was already impossible to fake. Lou Ferrigno. He's 72 years old now, and the foundation of how he built that physique hasn't disappeared. Ferrigno's Olympia-era training was legendary for a reason. Brutally heavy compound lifts, high volume, a split routine hitting every muscle group twice a week, and a level of intensity most modern lifters would tap out of within a single session. That's not a program you simply keep running unmodified into your 70s. But here's what's genuinely interesting. The underlying principles behind that training have stayed remarkably consistent. Today we're breaking down 7 things. Before we get into thing 1, if you want honest breakdowns that separate documented fact from reasonable inference, instead of content that just makes things up for clicks, subscribe now. 1. The compound movement foundation. Squats, deadlifts, bench press, barbell rows. Ferrigno's entire training philosophy was built on compound movements that work multiple muscle groups simultaneously rather than isolated single-joint exercises. This principle doesn't expire with age. A training philosophy already built around that foundation has a genuine head start most men over 40 never established in the first place. For a physique built to play a character defined entirely by raw, functional power, isolation exercises alone were never going to cut it. The compound lifts weren't a stylistic choice. They were the only approach that could have built that specific look. 2. The twice-weekly split structure. Ferrigno's documented routine hit each muscle group twice per week rather than once, considerably more frequency than the old-school one body part per day, once-a-week bodybuilding split many men still default to. This connects to something we've covered before on this channel. Muscle protein synthesis stays elevated for roughly 48 hours after training, then drops. A once-weekly hit per muscle leaves days on the table with zero growth signal. Whether that came from intuition, his father Matty's coaching, or genuine trial and error, the outcome lines up remarkably well with training research that wouldn't be formally established for decades afterward. 3. Constant variation to maintain engagement. Documented accounts consistently mention Ferrigno shuffling exercise order and swapping movements regularly, specifically to avoid monotony and keep the mind-muscle connection sharp rather than running the exact same sequence indefinitely. For a man over 40, this principle solves a problem most training programs never address directly. Boredom is a genuine training killer. Not because the exercises stop working, but because adherence quietly collapses once a routine feels like punishment instead of a challenge. There's a training-specific benefit here too. Slightly varying exercise order and selection week to week reduces repetitive strain on any single joint pattern. Since the exact same movement isn't being loaded in the exact same way, session after session indefinitely. 4. Dedicated recovery days, not a modern addition. Ferrigno's training documentation includes dedicated recovery time, built into his weekly structure decades before recovery became a modern buzzword the fitness industry rediscovered. Serious athletes from Ferrigno's generation were already building deliberate recovery into their programming. They simply didn't have a marketing category to sell it under. The principle isn't new. The industry just recently figured out how to package and monetize something legitimate lifters already understood. This next stretch is where documented history ends and reasoned analysis begins. So stay with me here, because this is honestly the most useful part for anyone over 40 watching. Subscribe now if you want more breakdowns built this carefully. 5. The likely volume reduction. Here's where we shift from documented fact to reasoned inference, and we want to be transparent about that shift. Multiple fitness sources covering Ferrigno's current status explicitly note that his Olympia-era high-volume routine is almost certainly not what he's running today. Recovery capacity declines with age regardless of training history, and any responsible coach would reduce total weekly volume while preserving training frequency. This is actually the single most important adaptation on this entire list, and it applies well beyond Ferrigno specifically. A lot of men over 40 make exactly the wrong trade. They reduce training frequency, going down to once a week per muscle group to be safe, while keeping the volume just as brutal on the days they do train. That's backwards. The research consistently favors preserving frequency and trimming volume, not the other way around, precisely because frequency is what keeps that muscle-building signal active across the week. 6. Joint protective exercise modifications. A body that spent decades under genuinely heavy barbell loads accumulates real wear on the shoulders, knees, and spine. The logical adaptation isn't abandoning compound lifts. It's adjusting the angle, the range of motion, or the implement. Dumbbells or machines replacing certain barbell movements where the joint path is safer while keeping the same muscles targeted. This mirrors exactly what we've discussed with other legends on this channel who've spoken openly about this exact adaptation. There's no reason to assume Ferrigno's approach would be any different, given how consistently this pattern shows up across every documented case of a serious lifter aging successfully. 7. recovery becoming a formal priority, not a side note. His training always included recovery days, but at 72, the reasonable assumption is that recovery has shifted from a scheduled day off to something closer to a genuine, tracked priority. Sleep quality, mobility work, possibly professional recovery modalities, treated with the same seriousness as the lifting sessions themselves. This is the same principle we've seen consistently across every real-life superhero over 50 we've covered on this channel. The training philosophy that built the physique rarely gets abandoned entirely. It gets protected, more deliberately, by an equal or greater investment in the recovery surrounding it. None of that contradicts the original training philosophy. It's simply what protecting that philosophy actually requires at this stage of life. If you want to see how to apply this exact 4-documented, 3-adapted framework to your own training at your own age, that's exactly what the next video breaks down step by step. So subscribe now so you don't miss it. And tell me in the comments, which of these 7 surprised you most? 4 of them straight from Ferrigno's own documented training history. 3 of them the logical, almost inevitable adaptations any physique built that way would need to make to keep training safely into its 70s. The men who kept building well into their 50s, 60s, and 70s never abandoned the fundamentals that got them there in the first place. They just stopped assuming those fundamentals could be applied exactly the same way forever, and adjusted before their body forced the adjustment on far worse terms.